Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lesson 8.5, Writing and Solving Equations to Find Complementary and Supplementary Angles. Go ahead and take a look at our two learning targets for today. The first, I can write and solve equations to find unknown complementary angles. The second, I can write and solve equations to find unknown supplementary angles. So we're going to be dealing with both types of angle relationships in our work today. As we're working together, keep this question in mind. How can you write and solve equations in order to find unknown complementary and supplementary angle measures? I just want to do a quick review of both complementary and supplementary angles. So you may remember that complementary angles are two angles that add up to 90 degrees. And we can write equations to represent this relationship using addition. So if you look at my equation, we have our first angle 65 degrees plus the second angle 25 degrees. And when we add those two together, we get a sum of 90. You also may remember that supplementary angles have a relationship where the two angles add up to 180 degrees. So if you look at the diagram below, you can see my two angles, 120 degrees. The obtuse angle is 120 degrees. This smaller acute angle over here is 60 degrees. And so I can write an equation to show their relationship, and that would be 120 degrees plus 60 degrees equals 180 degrees. And it's important that we have that equal sign there because otherwise it's not an equation. Okay, so we're going to be doing work that's a little bit different and has a couple of more steps than what we did last week. We're going to kind of add to what we learned. So let's take a look at this first example, finding unknown complementary angles. So if you look at the diagram, there's two angles. It looks like they add up to 90 degrees, and the directions say write and solve an equation to find the value of x, then find the value of the unknown angle. So let's take a look at this diagram here really quickly. So I have an angle here that's 20 degrees, right? And I can see that. And then up here, I have an angle that's represented by the expression 2 times x. So I don't know what the total measure of that angle is, so I'm going to need to write an equation to help me find out. So I'm going to come over here. Now these are complementary angles, which means that they add up to 90 degrees. So I can show this relationship by saying that 2x plus the 20 degrees are going to give me a total of 90 degrees, right? So there's my equation. The first angle, 2x, plus the second angle, 20, is going to give me a total of 90 degrees. Now, I have a two-step equation. So you have to channel some of the work that you remember from way back when we did two-step equations in algebra. My goal is to get this x all by itself. So I have to start getting rid of the other quantities that are with it. So I'm going to start with getting rid of this plus 20. And the inverse of plus 20 is going to be minus 20. And if I subtract 20 on one side, I have to also make sure that I subtract 20 on the other side. Okay? These are going to cancel, which is going to leave me on the left side with just 2 times x is equal to 90 minus 20 is going to leave me with 70. Okay, so now I have a one-step equation. Right now, x is being multiplied by 2. So I have to think about what is the inverse or the opposite of times 2. It's divide by 2. So if I divide by 2 on the left side, I have to divide by 2 over here. My 2's cancel because 2 divided by 2 is 1. And I'm left with x is equal to 35. Okay, so now I know what x is. So the last thing I'm going to need to do here, since I need to find the measure of the missing angle, is plug x into this expression to figure out what the measure is. So I know that the angle is represented by 2 times x. So let's substitute in 35 for x, right, and see what we get. Well, 2 times 35 is going to give me 70 degrees. So I know that this angle measures 70 degrees, and 70 plus 20 gives me 90, so I know that I'm correct. Okay, so the first thing I did was write my equation. I solved my equation to find x, and then I plugged x in to figure out the measure of the missing angle. Let's take a look at one using supplementary angles. So check this one out. Write and solve an equation to find the value of x, then find the value of the unknown angle. So this is going to be very similar, but just a little bit different because these angles, as you can see here, are supplementary. So I know that my first angle is 150 degrees. And I know that if I add to that the angle that is represented by 3x, I should have a total of 180. And that's because they're supplementary. Okay, so again, I have a two-step equation. We need to get x alone. Here I have a positive 150. I always am going to deal with this term that has the x here last. Okay, so if I have 150, positive, the opposite would be minus 150. And if I subtract 150 over there, I also have to subtract 150 over here. Oh, I had to put my stylus down for a minute. These cancel and I'm left with 3x. And on this side, 180 minus 150 is going to leave me with 30. To finish this equation off, I'm going to divide by 3 because this is times 3. So the opposite of times 3 is divide by 3. Need to divide by 3 over here. The 3's cancel. And I am left with x. X is equal to 10. Okay, so now we know that x is 10. So we have to come over here and use that to find the measure of this angle. So right now we know that this angle is equal to 3 times x. Well, we know that the value of x is now 10. So let's go ahead and plug that in. 3 times 10 is going to give me 30 degrees. Now, you may notice a connection over here to the work that we did in solving our equation. These equations can get much, much more complex. So it's important today that you're learning to follow these steps so that when the equations get more complex, you can follow this same process. So make sure that you're not skipping any steps when you're solving. Okay, let's try some together. So you'll notice that this one has a fraction, but it's not going to change the way that we solve it. We're still going to do the same process. So we notice that we have two complementary angles here. And one of them is 64 degrees. The other is equal to 1/2 x. So if we were going to write our equation here, then we would have 1/2 x, which is our first angle, plus 64 degrees is going to give us a total of 90 degrees. Okay. First thing we need to do to solve this equation to try to get x alone, we're going to leave this 1/2 x and we're going to deal with the positive 64. The inverse of positive 64 is minus 64. So I'm going to subtract 64 from both sides. These cancel. I'm left with 1/2 x over here. Go ahead and see what you would be left with on the right side, 90 minus 64. See what you come up with. Okay, so you should have subtracted and got a value of 26. And so now over here, we're multiplying by 1/2. Well, what's the inverse of multiplying by 1/2? Yeah, dividing by 1/2. So we're going to divide both sides by 1/2. Come over here, right? Our halves cancel. 26, go ahead and divide 26 by 1/2. And you can, instead of 1/2, you can use 0.5. See what you come up with. You should have gotten x is equal to 52. Okay, so now I'm going to come up and throw that in here to figure out what the value of my angle is. 1/2 times x, so 1/2 times 52. Go ahead and figure out what's the final measure of that angle. And remember, you can use 0.5 for 1/2. All right, nice job. If you said that the angle measured 26 degrees, you are absolutely correct. And we can even check this because 64 plus 26 is going to give us 90. Let's try one more with supplementary. See if you can help me with that one. What is happening here? Okay, so here we have supplementary angles, right? They make a straight line. They measure 180 degrees. So when I'm setting up my equation, I'm going to have 112 plus the 2.5x that's represented for this angle gives me a total of 180 degrees. Okay, now we want to get x alone. So what is the first step that we're going to have to take here? Good, hopefully you said subtract by 112 because that's the inverse. Subtract by 112 on both sides. Those cancel and I'm left with 2.5x. Go ahead and see what you get when you do 180 minus 112. You should have gotten 68. What is our last step going to be here? Go ahead and tell me what's our last step here to find x. Good, if you said divide by 2.5, you were correct because multiplying by 2.5 is what we're doing. So the inverse would be to divide. These cancel. X is equal to 68 divided by 2.5. It's going to give us, let me get my stylus here, it's not really cooperating, 27.2. Okay, so now our last step is to come up here and plug in our value for x to find this angle. So instead of 2.5x, I'm going to do 2.5 times 27.2. Plug that in my calculator, 2.5 times 27.2. And that should give you an angle value of 68 degrees. Okay. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you to try this one on your own. So go ahead and take a look at this question. Okay. Complementary angles, write and solve an equation. So the first thing I want you to do right now is to write your equation that you could use to find the value of x. Go ahead and do that now. Okay, so hopefully your equation looked something like this. 28 plus 4x is going to add up to give me a total of 90. And you could have written this as 4x plus 28. That would be correct as well. Because of commutative property, I can add in any order. All right, so I will give you a hint here. You're not going to touch this 4x yet. You're going to start with a positive 28. Go ahead and solve this equation and find the value of x. All right, so the first thing you should have done is getting rid of this positive 28 by subtracting 28 from both sides. The 28's cancel, and I'm left with 4x over here. And if I grab my calculator and I do 90 minus 28, I end up with 62. Sorry. And then the last step would have been to get rid of multiplying by 4. So I divide by 4. And if I divide 62 divided by 4, I get 15.5. Okay. Now what I want you to do is go ahead and plug in your x value and find the value of this unknown angle. Okay, so you should have shown somewhere on your scrap paper that you were actually doing 4 times 15.5. When you multiply that in your calculator, you get 62 degrees. All right, nice job with that one. Let's try one more. One more with supplementary. All right, so here I want you to go ahead and write your equation that you could use to find the value of x. Okay, so looking on your paper, you should have written 5x, I'll write that this way this time, plus the 85-degree angle gives us a total of 180 degrees. Go ahead now and solve that equation to find the value of x. Okay, so the first thing you should have done would be subtract 85 from both sides, because remember, we're doing the opposite. We're doing the inverse. These cancel. We're left with 5x over here is equal to 95. The last step would be the inverse of multiply by 5, so we would divide by 5. 5's cancel, and they leave us with 95 divided by 5, which gives us, oops, here we go. Gives us 19. My stylus is not cooperating today. All right, so now I want you to go ahead and use your x value, plug it in to find the value of this missing angle. Okay, so we substitute in 19 for x, so we have 5 times 19. 5 times 19 is going to give us a total of 95 degrees. All right, nice job with those. So just a quick summary of today's lesson. Complementary angles are the angles that add up to 90. Supplementary angles add up to 180. And that's important to remember because it helps us to write our equation. Now, to find unknown angles using equations or using algebra, there really are 3 simple steps. The first is to write your equation that shows the relationship between the angles, so whether they're complementary or supplementary. Step number 2 is to solve your 2-step equation to figure out what x is. And then your final step is to take that x value and substitute it in to find the missing angle. These 3 simple steps will get you a correct answer each time. Thanks for participating in today's lesson. If you have any questions or things that you are struggling with, make sure that you reach out and ask us. And otherwise, make sure that you're keeping up on your work, and I will see you sometime soon. Take care.